Hi guys, I'm Sean and today we're going to talk about manual lens on a gimbal. So there's quite a number of people asking me how to use autofocus and manual lens on a gimbal after they have watched one of our videos, how to film a fitness commercial using Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K. So let's face it, Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K is pretty bad in terms of autofocus, and I must admit I don't use a follow focus systems for a setup like this. Because in general, I think it's pretty heavy once you have extra follow focus systems on your gimbal, and I don't think it works or practical enough for my shooting style, especially with a one-handed gimbal, or some of you guys might be saying single piston gimbal. Anyway, another things with follow focus system on a one-handed gimbal is the extra cables, which might cause tangle or trip when you're using certain gimbal modes such as inverted mode, which can be very annoying and troublesome. But hear me out, I do believe using follow focus system on a gimbal is a more proper way, but there's a few things you need to be aware of fix. You can try to have extra manpower or maybe wireless systems, and of course extra shooting time. So you can either get a follow focus system on your gimbal, or you can just use some of the tips that I'm going to share with you in this video and ignore the follow focus system. So let's get started right away with the first tip. First tip, stay at the same distance. This is the most common ways to keep your subject in focus without moving your focus ring. So these steps can be easily achieved by keeping the distance between your camera and your subjects while filming. This sounds easy, but it can be a tricky steps to use when you're using on a gimbal. So when your subject is moving, you need to keep a similar speed with your subject or move along with your subjects and keep the distance consistent so that you can ensure your shots or framings is in focus. For example, when your subject is moving towards you, you can ask him or her to move a similar pace as yours or vice versa so that you can keep the distance and focus throughout the whole filming process. Tip number 2, pull focus with another hand. This might sound very direct, but there's a few requirements. First off, light setups. So a light camera, light lens, and light gimbals. Because the lighter the setups, the easier, the more stable, and the longer you can take. Secondly, use a smooth focus ring lens. Because the smoother the lens or smoother the rings, you can pull focus easily without affecting the gimbal. Thirdly, train your arm. You definitely need to hold your gimbal firmly with one hand and pull focus with another hand. So a strong arm is definitely needed to achieve this technique. So this technique can achieve pretty creative shots, but requires a lot of retakes to get the shot right. Tip number 3, shoot at mid-range. I love this technique a lot because it helps me to minimize the probability of out of focus in my shots. To keep it simple, you just have to keep a mid-range distance between your camera and subjects instead of too close or too far. Because the closer your subject to your camera, the more obvious out of focus happens. You can still get out of focus even if you're using this technique, but you will get lesser out of focus and smoother transition between out of focus and focus when you move towards or further away from your subjects. This is definitely not an everyday move, but it's very useful if you know when or how to use it. So let's get to tip number 4, which is use a wider angle lens. I believe this is a 101 gimbal tips. Just use a wider angle lens because wider angle lens tends to have lesser problems in terms of focusing, because the wider the angle the lens, the more in focus, the lesser shallow depth of field. Normally, a wider lens is used for established shots or scenery shots. In that case, I will use infinity focus to make sure most of things is in focus and I can just move around with my camera. However, you should still be careful with focusing on a wider angle lens because you probably use a wider angle for a mid shots, which then you're required to pre-focus your subjects before pressing the record button. To counter this issue, you can combine the previous tips and the next tips that I'm going to share with you, which is stop down your aperture. I'm not going to ask you to step down to f22 or f16s. Instead, you can just stop down to f3.2 or f4 and above, which is going to make a big difference. So when I'm shooting a wider angle shots, I will just stop down to maybe f4, f5.6 to keep my shot in focus. Sometimes I will just stop down to f2.8 or f3.2 for a more compressed shots such as a 50mm or a 85mm. These reduce the shadow depth of field, but the compressed shots like a 50 or 85 will probably get sufficient out of focus at the background. I used to love blurry background and bokeh when I'm starting my filmmaking journey, but after years of experience, I would rather to have a more focused shots instead of blurry backgrounds. So sometimes I would rather sacrifice some of the bokehs to get the shot in focus. And one more thing, you should always know that there's a lot of ways to separate subject and backgrounds besides than using blurry background. Next tips, use camera movements to hide your flaws. I know it might sound cheating, but it works. It's kind of my go-to technique as well to create some illusions on my subjects is in focus. Most of the audience wouldn't notice the minor out of focus if the shots involve a lot of good amount of camera movements, because a lot of time our eyes aren't able to pick up everything clearly when there's so many things happening in a frame. This might not be an easy technique to master, but surely it's helpful, especially if you're looking for a longer take shot. Next is not a secret, shoot more. I'm pretty sure you will hardly get a perfect shot in your first takes, and normally takes quite a number of takes to get the shot right and in focus. So me personally, I will just take like 4 to 5 shots to get it right. So don't be lazy, be patient and shoot more. After all the technique and tips, keep in mind all you need to do right now is these last steps, which is cut out all the unfocused shots. Editing's assemble much more than just clip on timeline or tell better stories. It also polishes your shots by cutting out the bad parts of the shots. I can assure you a lot of my final videos has to do a lot of video editing so that it looks much more appealing or gel well with the final edits. For the filmmaker who use manual lens on gimbal, I hope this video is helpful and make your life easier. If you use the tips that I mentioned earlier, I'm sure you'll get a more crisp and focused shots on your gimbal next times. So if you enjoyed this video, subscribe our channel, give us a thumbs up, and also let me know what you feel like learning for the next video in the comment section below. And as always, create, learn, and have fun. I'll see you guys in the next video.